Although we've learned about the style.css file and how that's part of the template hierarchy, it is possible and is often the case where you need to have additional style sheets loaded as well. So hopefully you've looked into or will look into compiled CSS, things like Sass and less, because they let you write a little bit more efficiently, and it will oftentimes export one large file, so you may just use that as your style sheet, or you may have a couple different ones that you need to include. So I want to show you just a few things at this point about how to link up other style sheets besides the style.css one. So the first thing I want to do here is I'm going to add a new folder called assets, and inside of that I'm going to add a new folder called CSS, and this is where I will add a custom.css file. And we'll just do something like background color for that is going to be black. Okay, so we have our custom CSS file set up. Now, how do we include it? To do this the right way, we have to come back into our functions.php file and look for where we enqueued our styles before. Now, I talked about this very briefly, but basically we have a few parts to the enqueue style function. We have the name of it, so this is a unique name so that we could refer to it elsewhere, which I'll show you in a second. The get style sheet directory URI, which will point us to our into our theme directory, so then we could grab our style.css. There are no dependencies. We're having the quote unquote version of it be the current timestamp. And then this is going to work for all media or all media types. So what we could do is copy this, change it to custom CSS, and then this is going to be assets CSS custom. So that's pretty straightforward. The other thing that we could do, though, that we haven't talked about yet is we can make our custom CSS dependent on our main CSS, which means that whenever the custom CSS is loaded, we want to make sure that the main CSS is loaded first so that we get any benefits of the cascading styles or cascading nature of CSS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in the handle to our, I'll increase this a bit so it breaks down the line, to our main CSS. So what that means is that when the custom CSS is loaded, WordPress will make sure that main CSS is loaded ahead of time. Now I'll point out again that time, this should be set to maybe the default value of just blank, which will give us the version number of WordPress once you're done developing. While you're developing, having it echo the timestamp means that it won't cache it, which means that you'll see those changes when you refresh the browser. So let's come back over to our site now. And if we check out our site, we could see, okay, the background is black. That is working properly. Now you could probably think of a ton of ways that you could use multiple CSS files or custom CSS files. This is it. But there are times where you also want to work with an external CSS file that's not inside of WordPress. So one case of that is, let's say I was working with Google Fonts and wanted to use this font and I had it selected. It will give us a URL to that CSS. Now I am using web fonts currently with this theme, but I have them downloaded and bundled with the theme, so you don't have to be accessing the internet to see this. However, I do like to use Google Fonts or hosted fonts from time to time, and I'll show you how to include them so that anytime you have external CSS, you also know how to work with that. So what we would first do is I'm going to copy and put this up above, and Varela font CSS will be the handle we give it. However, this all is going to come out and be replaced by the actual URL that Google gave us. So when I paste that in, that is going to be the site it goes to. Now, in this case, we probably don't need that to be refreshed every time, so I'm going to leave it with the static or default. This will echo out the version of our theme or of WordPress as a default one, and then it could cache it because we do want caching involved with this. We're not too worried about that changing, but you could always stick time back in there to force a change. Now, the thing I want to point out is that our main CSS, let's say that it needed to depend on these fonts. So what we could do then is, even with your main style sheet, you can make it dependent on other ones. So now we have this big cascading flow here. I'll make it smaller, harder to read, but just fit it on one line to show. Here we have our main.css, which is our main style, and it is making sure that we have the fonts pulled in. And then when we have our custom CSS loading, it's going to make sure that main is included, which is also making sure that the font is included. So just to show you the interrelatedness and how to set up multiple ones, but if you're working just within WordPress, you could basically copy this over and over again just to link to your different style sheets. So at this point, go ahead and follow along with what we did. I know that this is redundant to link to this. Maybe you want to change it to a different font and practice pulling in that font just with this custom one. And then in your own project, see if it makes sense to pull in some custom CSS. Maybe you've been adding a bunch and you want to break it up. Maybe you have already been wondering this. Hey, how do I apply this? Now's the time to go ahead and try that out. Again, this isn't something that you would always need, but oftentimes in a site, there is more than one CSS file. So this is quote unquote the right way to do it by leveraging the functions.php file. And we've looked at some of the dependencies and the ways you could work with that. So go ahead and try this on your own, and then I'll show you how we can include some JavaScript in our themes when we need that.